Over the 3 days of the Woodstock Music Festival, 32 acts appeared. And what an incredible weekend it was. But in this episode, we're going to look at the acts that were invited who chose not to appear and how that would have made a much different festival. We'll also take a look at the film and the album that came out. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the money that the artists made for appearing at Woodstock. So you ready to dig deeper into the backstory of Woodstock? Well then, let's drop the needle. When you look at Woodstock, you can see lots of incredible talent was there. But if you dig deeper, you can find out that a lot of talent was invited and chose not to attend. Now, at the very top of the list of Michael Lang and the promoters' ideal for Woodstock would be to have the Beatles be there. But of course, the Beatles at this point were disintegrating. So they reached out and invited John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. But at that point, Lennon was having a lot of problems with the U.S. government and could not get into the country. Next up on their hit list would have been Blind Faith, Eric Clapton's supergroup, who was actually touring the U.S. at that time, and Eric wanted to go to Woodstock, but the other members of the band shot that idea down. The Byrds were also invited, but they declined, thinking, it's just going to be another music festival, and what's the point? The Doors canceled at the very last moment, and partially it was because Jim Morrison was afraid of playing large outdoor concerts. But Robbie Krieger and John Densmore went to Woodstock, but did not perform. Bob Dylan, who would have been an obvious one to be at Woodstock, since he lived right there in Woodstock, was never ever seriously considered. And part of that reason was that Bob was scheduled to get on the Queen Elizabeth, a cruise ship, and cruise over to England to appear at the Isle of Wight Festival a week after Woodstock. So he was not available. But what's interesting is that the band who did play at Woodstock then went to England and appeared with Bob at the Isle of Wight Festival a week later. Would have been great if Bob could have been at Woodstock, don't you think? Iron Butterfly was another big act that was scheduled to appear at Woodstock. But they landed at LaGuardia Airport and got stuck. So they contacted the festival and said, we can't get there. You got to send a helicopter to LaGuardia, fly us out, we'll play, and then fly us back. Well, this is right in the middle of the festivities, and the organizers said, no thanks. Tommy James and the Shondells were another act that were invited to appear. But Tommy James was in Hawaii at the time. And he tells the story that he got a call from his manager who said, there's some pig farmer up in North State, New York, who wants you to play a concert in one of his fields. Well, here's Tommy sitting in Hawaii, looks around, goes, this sounds a little dodgy. And so he declined. Another big group who was invited was Led Zeppelin. But their manager declined because he said there'll just be another act on stage with all these other acts. And then a very famous folk singer was invited to come to Woodstock, and she really wanted to, until at the last minute, her manager told Joni Mitchell, don't go to Woodstock, stay in Manhattan and tape the Dick Cavett show. It'll be much better exposure. Obviously, Joni did that, but she didn't necessarily agree with him. She watched the TV footage of Woodstock and ended up writing a song called Woodstock, which became a huge hit for Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and became sort of the theme song for the whole event. And she wasn't even there. The Rascals declined an invitation, as did Procol Harum, and as did Poco. Another big act that the organizers obviously wanted was the Rolling Stones. However, the problem was, during the time of the concert, Mick Jagger was in Australia filming Ned Kelly. Simon and Garfunkel were invited, but they couldn't make it because they were recording an album. Bruce Springsteen's early band, Steel Mill, were also invited, but they couldn't make it because they were already booked for another gig. And Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention were invited to play Woodstock, but they didn't. And here's Frank's reasoning after he thought about it. A lot of mud at Woodstock. We were invited to play there. We turned it down. Wow, a lot of amazing talent who were invited. As I said earlier, think about how the festival would have changed if any of these acts would have appeared. Now we turn to the Woodstock film. As I mentioned earlier, Artie Konfeld had gone to Warner Brothers and secured money to produce the film, but it wasn't very much. It was only a budget of $100,000. And in order to actually cover the event, Michael Wadley, who the director, decided they needed a film crew of over 100 people. And he knew he couldn't pay them. So what he did is he cut a deal with the crew called Double or Nothing. And what the stipulation was is if the film was a success, they would be paid double their regular wages. If it was a failure, they got nothing. Luckily for all, the film turned out to be a huge success. It made very dynamic use of split screen, so you could see an artist in the crowd from various angles during a sequence. And it also won an Academy Award for the Best Documentary Feature Film. Now we turn to the album. The album is called Woodstock, Music from the Original Soundtrack and More, and it was released in May of 1977. It is a triple album. The iconic cover shows a young couple at the festival wrapped up in a blanket. It turns out that this couple got married just a couple of years after Woodstock, raised a family, and lived there their entire lives, just 40 miles from the festival site. Now, to make it feel like you were really at the festival, the album included not only some of the music performances, but stage announcements and some interviews with some of the crowd. And some of them got, well, maybe a little bit off color for the time. And if you look at this album here, which is my radio promotion copy, you can see that on the cover it says, "This is a documented recording of the events at Woodstock. It would be most advisable to screen the record carefully before clearing it for use on the air." Needless to say, I didn't screen it. I put it on the air immediately at my FM radio stuff show in LA. Now, it's kind of interesting to look at the artists who played at Woodstock and figure out how much did they actually get paid for playing there. And there is a wide variety of amounts that the acts were paid. And I can't quite figure out how the organizers decided how they would stage that so that this artist made so much and this artist only made this. But let's take a look at some of the artists that were there and the range of the amount of money they were paid for performing on that stage. As I said, the headliner was Jimi Hendrix. He played a 2-hour set for a dwindling crowd, and he was paid the most of any act, $18,000. Now, at the other point of the spectrum, the act that was paid the least for their set was Quill, who opened up day 2 with a 45-minute set. And they were only paid $375. Again, going to the top end, Blood, Sweat, and Tears made $15,000 for their performance. And Creedence Clearwater, who had been the first act to sign to Woodstock, made the same amount as Joan Baez, $10,000 each. At $7,500 for each of their sets, we have the Jefferson Airplane, the band, and Janis Joplin. Then Richie Havens, Canned Heat, Sly and the Family Stone, and The Who made between $6,000 and $7,000 each for their sets. Arlo Guthrie made the same as Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, $5,000 each for their sets. Ravi Shankar made $4,500 for his set in the rain. Now, Joe Cocker, who many think is one of the best performances of Woodstock, he only made $1,375 for his set. And John Sebastian, who got drafted to come up and play an improvisational 25-minute set, got paid $1,000. And Sha Na Na, who had the most members on stage of anybody who performed at Woodstock, for their set, they made a total of $700. Now, there is no Spotify for this episode because we talked about the artists who were not at Woodstock. We talked about the movie and the album, but the music that's on the album we've already talked about in a previous episode. Now, when we started this mini-series on outdoor festivals of 1969, I said we'd talk about two. One that was very famous, and of course that's Woodstock. And then one which is infamous, and that's Altamont. So we're going to go see if we have any sympathy for the devil in the next episode when we look at what happened at the Altamont Raceway. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep a rockin'.
If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.